Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. My name is Steve Chapman, and I'm president of the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I'll be your host for today for this national webinar on getting back to work in retirement. I'd like to welcome all of the members from across Canada who are joining us for today's webinar. I'm currently in Toronto participating in the Ontario district meetings, and I'm glad to say that we're joined by the Ontario branch presidents who've included this webinar in their agenda. As president of the Ottawa branch, I'm very pleased that we're able to share this event with NAFR members nationally. We're proud to be able to offer you simultaneous interpretation services today, and I want to take a moment to explain how it will work. Pour faire passer le canal audio d'anglais au français et inversement, emmenez votre curseur de souris n'importe où sur la fenêtre de Zoom et une barre d'outils apparaîtra en bas de l'écran. L'un des outils ressemble à un globe terrestre et s'intitule Interprétation. En cliquant sur cette icône, vous pouvez passer d'une langue à l'autre grâce à l'interprète qui travaille en coulisses. To switch your audio sound between English and French, move your mouse anywhere on the Zoom screen and a toolbar will appear at the bottom. Click on the icon that looks like a globe and is labeled Interpretation, and you'll be able to switch between English and French. We thank Nick Irvine, our interpreter, from Irvine Interpretation, who we know will be providing an excellent service. Merci d'avance, Nick. Now I'd like to formally begin our event by recognizing the First Nations on whose traditional lands our association offices are located. In Ottawa, this is unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation and has always held great historic, social, and spiritual significance for the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Last year, we received strong interest from our members to hold events and webinars about finding meaningful and fulfilling work in retirement. That's why, back in March, we held the first of a two-part national webinar series to help retirees all over the country who are thinking of returning to work. If you missed our first webinar, you can visit the Ottawa branch page and view the video on our YouTube channel by clicking on the link. We're delighted to be back with you today with the second webinar in the series, focusing on taking on term and casual employment with the government and helping you set up your own small business to take on professional service contracts. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Tamara Guttman of TLG Consulting and Communications. Tamara was one of our keynote speakers at our Thrive in Retirement event last year. She's a federal retiree after a distinguished career with Global Affairs Canada, where she served as Canada's ambassador to Hungary, Slovenia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and as the department's Inspector General. Since retiring in 2022, Tamara has enjoyed having the flexibility to pursue her passions, including creating her own consultancy to share her experience and expertise on leadership development, organizational ethics, and effectiveness. She is an accomplished training guide and facilitator, and she developed the material for this webinar specifically for federal retirees, and we're proud to say that she's a member as well. But before I turn things over to Tamara, I want to explain how we'll handle questions. There will be a dedicated session for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. But you're welcome at any time to type questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the Q&A box, just move your mouse around at the bottom of the screen until the Q&A box appears. Over 600 people have registered for this webinar, so we might receive a lot of questions. You can help by managing our time by voting for the questions that are the most important for you. You'll be able to see all the questions that have been asked in the Q&A box, so please use the thumbs up feature to vote. and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We're recording this webinar, and we'll send you a follow-up email afterwards with links so that you can access both the video recording and the presentation slides. Now, you have patiently waited long enough, so without further ado, I'll pass over to our presenter, Tamara Guttman.
Thank you so much, Steve. And hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on getting back to work for federal retirees, where, as Steve says, we're going to focus on everything to do with doing casuals, terms, contracts, and a lot of other things in between. As noted, this is the second in our webinar series on working in retirement. And we have a lot that we're going to cover today. I'm giving you a heads up. It's a busy session. So feel free to jot down questions or take notes as you go. But let's get into it. So first up is, why are we having these webinars? Why are we doing this? Because we're retired. We're supposed to be enjoying our life. But the reality is that many of us, as federal retirees, do choose to do some work in our retirement. And we want to make sure that all of us, as federal retirees, can be ready to seek and take on paid work if and when we want it, and that we're all well informed about our options and the main issues we should consider as we're doing this. Now, our first webinar in March, we focused kind of on the front end issues of getting ready to work. I'm going to do a very quick recap of some of the quick points from that. But as Steve says, I do encourage you to go to the Ottawa branch website where you can explore it more, because there's a lot there and we're not going to repeat all of those same issues today. Today, we're going to focus on how we work as retirees. And so this will be kind of a primer to the different kinds of work and what you need to know about those. So let's look quickly at what we covered last time. Just a few key messages. So first off, a reminder to all of us that, your public service experience and skills and all of your career experience are valuable to employers. Don't ever doubt that. We started by doing a little reflection exercise to think about what you enjoy doing as work, from all the many things you've done in your career. And importantly, why you want to work, because we all have our own motivations for doing this in retirement. Maybe it's an experience you want to have. You want to contribute back to your professional community. Maybe you want to make some extra money, to travel or pay the mortgage down, whatever it is, just to have that sense of what is driving you. We then focused on presenting your past skills and experience for employers. So that was really about creating and modernizing your CV. We looked at, the importance of translating your old work, those old job titles you had in government, to focus on the skills and what you offer now to employers. And we talked about the importance of having your quick pitch. And that is that, 3 bullets, 1 minute summary of who you are and what you offer, because that's what you're going to be using in those conversations with employers and clients. We, of course, looked at different channels to search for work, using your network and other means. Do go back and look at those. I will say today on this, of course, we know it's a tough economy, right? Government is tightening up. There's no question. The private sector faces a number of challenges. So it is a changing job market, but do not be discouraged, because there is always a need for people with experience and know-how and who can adapt to work situations and can be available to pitch in, lend a hand, add expertise. So don't feel that because the economy is tighter, you can't go out there and promote yourself. We talked about attitude, being confident in what you offer, because you should be, and being flexible to what might come your way. And of course, we talked about a bunch of practical tips, setting up your home office, security clearances. Again, go back and look at that one. And of course, we talked about tax and pension, and we're going to touch on those again today because they are so very important. So with that, let's get into today's agenda, which is um, largely we're going to explore how you work as a retiree through different scenarios, and each one's going to have its own checklist. So our three scenarios cover what will be kind of the most typical situations that you're going to find yourself in. So we have someone having a first-time work offer, someone who's a little more busy, has a kind of mixed work portfolio, and someone who wants to create a business and work through contracts. I'm going to go through those fairly quickly, but don't worry because we're going to do a deep dive into the main issues that come up for each of those. Now, before we start with the scenarios, I will say that the subject of work and retirement is a really big one. It's really broad. And because we have just an hour together, we're going to focus this a bit. So, by and large, we're talking about work that is part time or occasional work. So, this is about fitting work into your retired life, not canceling your retirement. Secondly, we're going to largely use examples that relate to your past career in the federal public service, although there's many other ways that you can work. Some of what we talk about will apply to other things as well, but that will help us to focus. And my last note is that there are going to be times where I'm going to raise a little flag of where it is useful to get expertise from the right sources. So that's largely when we're talking about taxes and your finances and your pension. Um, I will signal these. I am not an expert. It's not a good idea for me to give you advice on your finances, so I'll just make that little signal to you. So, why don't we dive in? Here are our three scenarios that we're going to be working through today. So we're going to meet Joanne, Pierre, and Samina. Joanne is the newly retired person with her first work offer. Then we'll talk about Pierre, who's been retired for a longer time and is doing a more busy portfolio of casual and other work. And then finally, we'll go to Samina, who's going to create a company and wants to work through contracts. And I think all of us should be able to see ourselves in at least one of these scenarios, if not all of them. So here we go. Let's look at Joanne. So Joanne retired 8 months ago. She was a communications manager in government, and now she's been offered work to do a study with her former department. She's been told that it's casual employment. It's going to run from September to December. Her salary will be set by the position classification and level, which happens to be the level she was at when she retired, and her pay will be prorated by her hours of work, and her work location is flexible and remote. So many of us have been Joanne and we think, wow, this is great. A bit of work. I'm getting a little bored. This will be fun to do. I'll make some extra money for Christmas or Hanukkah. Fantastic. Um, but then also she may think, okay, well, how does this work? What do I actually need to do and what do I need to know? And so we have created a checklist for Joanne. And this is a checklist that I think anyone who's doing work for the first time as a retiree, when you're working for the government, or just doing occasional work, this checklist may be helpful. So we've divided this into three parts. The first is an action list, which are the things that need to happen or things Joanne needs to do, then issues we want her to watch, and a few other suggestions. So her action list, first and foremost, to know the mechanism to arrange this work, and that is through a letter of offer. And I know a lot of you listening out there know how that works. You know that a letter of offer is how the federal government offers work. But it's good to just have the fundamentals down. That letter is going to contain the start and end dates for her casual. It'll set out her compensation, what role she'll play. It'll set out certain obligations, although she is not a Government of Canada employee in the legal sense from a casual. And Joanne is going to get a whole bunch of forms to fill out, which are going to include tax forms. And these will be important. Second, we want Joanne to check what the condition is of this casual, meaning, is it full-time, part-time, or what's called as required? So full-time, we know that means you work full-time. Part-time is defined by Treasury Board as being required to work 12 hours or more per week. As required, though, is a quite a different creature, and that means there are no set or fixed hours. So you work as little or as much as needed, even if it adds up to quite a lot. And this will be important when we're talking about the rules. Now, Joanne also needs to know how to track and submit her work hours, assuming she's not full-time. So she needs to check with the employer what this involves. Is there a form, for every 2 weeks, or is it a monthly form she fills out to show how many hours she's worked? She needs to check her office setup because she's been told that this is a flexible location or remote. So Joanne needs to find out, does that mean she needs to be in the office place sometimes? If so, when? Are they going to give her a work laptop and an email address? I've had both kinds of casuals, sometimes working with my own equipment, sometimes with the government's. If she needs to be in the office, she needs to know there's a place to work, have a building pass, all of that. So it's kind of basic admin, but these are questions you need to ask. And if she's only working from home and doesn't get a government laptop, she's got to make sure her own equipment works well, that she has the right software to communicate, and so on. And as she's doing this letter of offer, Joanne should make sure that her security clearance is in good standing so that it can be reactivated. And again, if you go back to the first webinar, we talk about that. Now, the issues we want Joanne to watch are the two golden rules, which are the 90-day rule for casuals and the 6-month rule for pension. We're going to get into these when we do our deep dive in a few minutes, don't worry. We want Joanne to watch her income tax. This one can be the real surprise when you start working as a pension recipient. So first, remember those forms. She had forms to fill out. Two of them are one's for federal tax, one's for provincial tax. It matters how you fill out those forms because when you work as a pensioner, that little piece of work is not your primary source of income. And so this is the first place I wave that flag to get advice on how to fill these out so that you are managing your income tax properly. Second part of that is when she gets paid. So when Joanne sees that first pay deposit in her bank account and says, yay, time to buy some shoes, or, if you're me, make a mortgage payment. It's important to go into My GC Pay or call the pay center and see how much tax has actually been deducted because it may not be as much as you expect. So if Joanne knows she's in a 30% tax bracket, but she sees 20% taxes deducted, she's going to know there may be a gap and she may need to set some aside. So this is very important to do, at least for the first few payments. And because Joanne is still within her first year of retirement, she is subject to the post-employment values and ethics obligations that we all take on, when we leave government. And that's largely about avoiding real perceived or potential conflict of interest. So in her case, because she's working with the same department, it's probably not an issue, but within that first year, she should check to make sure there's no concern or no advice about that. Last things for Joanne, consult the pension center. Anytime you sign a letter of offer for direct work with the government as a pensioner, give them a call. They really encourage this. They want to make sure you have the benefit of their advice so that you don't create a risk for your pension. And secondly, learn how to use My GC Pay if you're not on it already. This is that website where you can access your pay information. There's an internal one that full-time employees use, but there's also an external My GC Pay. You register it, it's really easy, and then you can access your pay info. So even if you haven't worked for the government in years, you will be there and you can find your past pay info. And if you are doing casuals or terms, you can access that. Let's now move on to Pierre. So scenario number 2. There's similarities to Joanne, but it's a little more advanced. So Pierre has been retired for 7 years. He's an HR specialist, which is a great position to be in if you want to work because they're always in demand. And so Pierre has been doing a variety of casuals, of term work, doing work for different departments, even some work through an agency where he's a subcontractor. So he's got a whole mix of things going on. And his compensation varies a lot for all these different types of work, as do his tax deductions. And he is finding it hard to keep track of this. What's more for Pierre is that the pension center has cautioned him about watching his pension status. So let's look at Pierre's checklist. The fundamentals on his action list are similar to Joanne's, but he's been doing this a while, right? So he knows how the casual works, he knows how the letter of offer works. So we're really going to focus with Pierre on managing this portfolio of work, and that is to do some business planning, um, which may be something that feels a bit foreign when you've been working just as a salaried government employee. But really what we mean is we want Pierre to maybe stop, do a little reflection about his goals. He's gotten so busy, he's doing so many things. It's easy to get into kind of a yes fever once you get going and people start asking for your services. So take the time, think about, okay, is this giving me the things I want for myself? And he can think about the pace of work, the frequency, the type of work he's doing, the compensation as well. Is it giving me what I want? Secondly, we want Pierre to set up a tracking system for all these jobs and his compensation. So there's different software out there you can use, business software, accounting software, that you can use to track this. I'm not a very high-tech person, so I just use a simple Excel spreadsheet. I have one set up for each tax year, and on it I write each job that I have, who it's with, what type of arrangement it is, so if it's casual or term, or if it's a contract, and then I write, of course, my compensation and each individual payment and the tax part of that, and that puts everything in one place. It's very easy, but use what works for you. The point is to kind of professionalize how you manage your working life. You have to be your own HR department and your own finance section when you're working for yourself. So we need Pierre to do that and to also have a planning tool so that he can track all these different work periods and make sure he's creating a gap between each work arrangement, because we'll talk about that 6-month rule. Um, and that can, again, you can use software or a spreadsheet. Frankly, I just use a calendar, a big old wall calendar, where I can mark down all the different work I'm doing. I can color code it. But more importantly, I can see that I have gaps and I can see that I'm also creating space for the other things I want to do in my retirement, because that's our goal ultimately. So tracking and planning. We also want Pierre to get on top of his self-administration, get hard information. So talk to the pension center to find out what the concerns are and what data they're looking at, and do the same either with CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, or if he has a financial advisor or an accountant, so that he has a better grip on his income tax situation with all of this different income. So get the information and manage it with what we want Pierre to watch, then again, the two golden rules, the 90-day casual, but for him especially the pension rule that we'll dive into very soon, I promise. Of course, we want him to watch his income tax accumulation. And he might also, as he's doing this reflection and doing his business planning, look at this kind of mix of work, this variety of forms of work he's doing, some direct, some through an agency, and just make sure that that balance is working for him and it's giving him what he wants. Other suggestions for Pierre is he might actually consider registering a business, kind of transforming this busy portfolio of work into a business with a name, so that he can kind of brand what he's offering better if this is what he wants to continue doing, and also so that he can manage his finances and his tax obligations a little better. And of course, we're always going to suggest getting some financial advice, even if it's just to start, just to get himself on the right track. So that was quite a lot for Joanne and Pierre, but we're going to do a quick deep dive onto some of those key issues. So let's talk about the basics on casuals and terms with the federal government. Casuals, I think, as you know, are the most common way to hire retired public servants, right? Probably a lot of you out there have already done some of these. A casual is quite flexible, it's easy to implement, it does not create formal employee status under the Public Service Employment Act, so they're quite straightforward. A term is different. A term means you are formally, legally employed by the government. You become an employee for a specified period of time. You're subject to all the employment terms and conditions. You qualify for benefits and so forth. For both of these, pay is set by the employer, so in this case, the government, and it's tied to the position and classification that you are in. Income tax is deducted at source, but as we've just talked about, you need to watch this carefully. And by the way, that will apply also if you're doing other kinds of employment. So if we leave aside the federal government, if you go to work for a provincial government or a business or an NGO, any place where you're salaried and tax is deducted, you're still going to need to watch the rate of tax deducted to make sure that there's not a gap being created. Both terms and casuals with the federal government can impact your pension. If you're working for a provincial government, municipal, any other, this will not affect the pension. So the golden rules. First up, the 90-day rule and then the 6-month rule. These apply to work with all federal departments, agencies, and crown corporations. So the 90-day rule for casuals, I think most of you know, in that you can work a maximum of 90 days per calendar year per department. You can do as many casuals as you want to, as long as you respect that. But it is very important to track your hours and days of work in a casual. So the hours you track by keeping a timesheet. The days of work you need to track so you know how many of those 90 you have used. And here's an important tidbit that I had to learn the first time I did a casual after retirement, which is that any hours you submit in a day count as a full day of work. So if you've worked 2 hours on a Tuesday and 3 hours on a Thursday on a casual, and you submit those, you'll be paid for 5 hours. Very straightforward. But the system is going to see that you've worked Tuesday and Thursday, and you now have worked 2 days of your 90. So it's very common to have a conversation with the employer when you're submitting your first timesheet to see how they want you to do that, because sometimes they will want you to bundle your hours together so that they get the most out of those 90 days and you do as well. But don't assume, have that conversation. Now the 6-month rule. So honestly, if you drop off this webinar right here, this is the most important thing to know if you're doing any work for the federal government while you receive a pension. And that is that you can work up to 6 months minus a day, full-time or part-time, without affecting your pension. If you reach the 6-month mark, if that timer hits 6 months and goes off, your pension can be impacted. You become a net contributor to the pension plan, which means you no longer receive your pension. So, to avoid this, there's 2 important and easy things to do. First, for any casual or term, make sure you have an end date before 6 months. And this is really going to be up to you, because casuals and terms can go longer than 6 months. But for your purposes, you want to make sure there is a clear end date in writing. Sometimes with casuals, you'll see that they get rolled over or extended. Make sure you have that end date before 6 months. And you must have a 2-day break between any casual and term jobs. So by having that 2-day break, some people make it a week because it's easier. The clock resets and you restart your 6-month count and you're fine. There is, though, a very important exception to the 6-month rule, because remember with Joanne and the different types of casuals, if you are doing an as required casual, then you cannot accumulate time towards the 6 months. You don't have to worry about that, even if you end up doing a lot of work hours. Except there's an exception to the exception, because why not? That's fun. And that is that if you forget that all important 2 day break between your jobs. So if you do a 3 month as required casual here, and then you start a 4 month as required casual with no break in between, you end one, then start the next, you could find yourself in a bit of trouble. So just be careful on that. All right. That was a lot on work directly with the federal government. We're going to change gears now because we're going to talk about Samina's scenario, which is quite a bit different because Samina wants to create a business and work largely through contracts. So here she is. Samina's retired for 3 months, or pardon me, 3 years. She's a retired economist. She's done a few casuals in this time, but she's seeing a real demand for her services. And now Samina wants to start a company to do consulting and to work through contracts. She's already had an indication of interest from a government agency that wants to offer her a contract. So she's quite keen to get started. And you're going to see her checklist looks quite a bit different from Pierre's and Joanne's. So let's take a look. Her action list is really, we're just giving you the basics here, and then we'll do a little deep dive. So she needs to register her business. So when you're creating a business, you need to register the business. She's going to do that with Canada Revenue Agency and very likely with her province where the business operates. She's going to create a basic business plan. There's all kinds of shapes and sizes to your business plan, but as a minimum, she's going to want to set out what her main business activity is, what services she's offering, what her pricing model is. She needs to figure out which clients she wants to target. So if it's federal government agencies, great. Provincial, fine. Private sector, it can be any. Whoever they are, she also needs to think about how she's going to reach them. So how she's going to promote this business. Next on her checklist, she's going to get busy seeking and negotiating contracts. And we're going to go into contracts in just a moment. She might also, as she's kind of creating the business, start looking at the supply and procurement system for the federal government. You can also do it for the provincial government as another way to get contracts. So Samina's what to watch list is, again, it's a bit different because she doesn't have to worry about her pension implications if she's working through contracts. She's not going to worry about casual days. But she does need to know how to manage the financial side of her business. So how she's going to manage income tax, how she will plan her business expenses and track all of those. She's going to need to know about GST, HST, and I'll talk about that shortly. And she needs to think about what kind of business she's going to create and the pros and cons of those different types. Finally, we really want Samina to make sure she's getting advice on creating a small business. And luckily, there's a lot of information out there. There are some great sources. CRA has a lot of really important information on their websites. If you go to provincial business creation or business registry sites, there's a lot there. There's many places you can look. The one that I thought was really useful is the Business Development Bank of Canada, BDC. If you go on their website, they have a ton of information on creating and running a small business. It's all really clear. Even I can understand it. You know, it talks about the different types of business, how you create a business plan, and all the other things you need to know. So lots of good stuff. And of course, talk to people, get information, ask advice, reach out to people you know who have done this. For all of our scenarios, we're suggesting people get financial advice. In Samina's case, when you're creating a business, it can be really useful to get that advice at the outset so that you know how to set up your financial plan. You know what to be aware of, what risks there are, what you have to manage. And she might want to look at her banking arrangements, because quite often, if you have a business, you may set up a separate bank account to manage that kind of flow of income and payments and things. So that's a pretty big checklist, and it's quite different from what we've been talking about. But we'll do our closer look, and we're going to start with the issue of contracts. because contracts are by and large the mechanism through which you arrange work if you're not doing direct employment. So let's dive in there. Contracts, as we know, the basic definition, it's a binding agreement where you're going to deliver a service or a product. There are many different kinds of contracts out there, and they all look a bit different. Um, when we're talking about doing contracts with the federal government, at least, we're largely looking at three categories. Now, it can be competitive bids, so where you're actually part of the procurement system, you're responding to a request for proposal and you're submitting a bid. Those can be quite demanding, quite an involved process. Much more common, I think, for a lot of us doing, offering our services in retirement is the non-competitive contract. So that's under $40,000 and it can be awarded without you having to submit a bid. Although be careful of the term non-competitive because you're still frankly competing because your client really wants to get the best value for money, but you're not submitting a bid. Another one you may encounter is a lump sum payment of $5,000 or less. This tends to be used if you're providing, a really targeted service, like they're bringing you in to do 2 days of training or a very short project. Um, you don't need a contract to govern it. They can just set up the arrangement with you and then you do an invoice to get paid. Very straightforward. But when you're doing any kind of contract, government, private sector, whatever it is, you are negotiating this. So it's not just the employer saying, here's what you're going to get paid. You need to negotiate a little bit, although the degree to which you can negotiate may vary. But there's some fundamentals that you will need to agree to, which is, of course, what you're going to get paid, what your rate of pay is, what that payment will be, or what the total sum of the contract might be. You're going to need to agree to what you're going to deliver, of course, and in what time period. And then there may be other variables in there. Maybe you need access to locations or to certain material. There'll be a lot of standard clauses on things like liability or indemnification, which means that you are accountable for the contract and can be held to account if something goes wrong. There'll be cancellation clauses, maybe an intellectual property clause. So there's lots of standard things. Whatever is in there, make sure you read it and understand it and you're asking questions if you don't understand, because a lot of it is very formal language, but focus on those key points of it. Now, when you're doing contract, you're not getting paid by a biweekly salary deposit. You're going to be invoicing your client. So there's lots of nice templates online that you can find that show how to do this. It can be quite simple. For a lot of us, when we're doing shorter contracts, we invoice at the end. So when we've completed the service or delivered the product, we'll do a single invoice, but it can vary. You can have interval payments. Basically, in your invoice, you're going to make sure that you're referencing the original contract or contract number. You're stating what you have delivered, especially if you've completed the contract, and you're saying what you need to get paid. So what is the payment due to you? That will be a total figure, but you may also need to provide a breakdown. So if you're working for a daily rate, you're getting paid $500 a day, yay you. Um, and you've worked 15 days, you will say, I worked 15 days at this rate. Here's my total. You will also, if you're doing a lot of contracts, you're going to add what the GST or HST is due on that amount on top of what is owed to you. So let's talk about the tax part, because when you do contract work, you manage your own tax obligations. So that's generally if you're running a business and if you're not doing direct employment. You need to set aside income for your income tax. Or if you are running a corporation, a small corporation as in your retirement, then you need to look at the corporate tax and make sure that you can cover that at tax time. GST and HST. So I'll do this really quickly. The basic rule is that if you are earning $30,000 or more over a 12-month period through contract work, again, not employment income, through contract work, you are going to need to be part of the GST or HST system, and you're going to need to collect that. So you charge it on top of your contracts, and you need to collect it and then pay it to the government, just like, a grocery store would do. Um, the 30,000 rule is cumulative. So if you work a $5,000 contract in June and then you work a, $30,000 contract in September, you have crossed that line in September. So it's cumulative, it's over 12 months. It is not based on a calendar year like your income tax. So I won't go further than that because I could go down a real rabbit hole, but if you're going to be doing multiple contracts and that's your main way of working and you're going to earn more than $30,000, talk to CRA's business helpline about registering for GST, HST. You do that after you register your business. You register for the additional GST, HST account. They will talk you through it. It's very easy to do, but you need to be aware of that. Other things about contracts. You have the option to become a supplier, to be part of the procurement system. If you're going to be submitting bids, you need to be part of that system. You need to register. It can also make it easier for you to access some non-competitive contracts as well. It's a really big issue that we don't have time to get into, but do take a look at the Canada Buys webpage if you're going to be doing contract work, because this can be very helpful. Last thing on contracts is that there are special rules for government contracts with former public servants. And these apply to any contract that any of us do, large or small, even tiny contracts. So the rule is that if for any contract, you must self-identify as a former public servant. So in your contract, there may be a little box that you need to check saying you're a former public servant, you're in receipt of a federal pension. Two, the client, so the government, has to justify why they are doing a contract with a former public servant. So mostly this is really straightforward. It's, you tick a little box, you don't have to do anything, but just to be aware of the policy. If you are doing bigger contracts, so contracts of $200,000 or more, there are other rules that apply, but that's the main one. And just the last note on contracts is always to remember that whoever you're dealing with, they are looking for value for money. So as you are proposing your rates and negotiating, just remember you may be competing with others, even if it's not a formal bid system. Subcontracts. So we just talked all about contracts, but actually, most of us are going to end up doing subcontracts a lot of the time. It's very common, especially when you're starting out doing this. And that just means that your contract is going through a third party. So whether you're working for the government or another body, they may have a larger contract with an agency or with a larger supplier. And they do this because, frankly, it's just less administrative burden than doing a whole bunch of small contracts. It's easier for you too. And what happens when you subcontract is, even if you're dealing directly with the client, say your government department, they may pay you through that third party, through a principal contractor, and that principal contractor will pay you. They will take a percentage. They may charge that to the client on top of your pay. It may come out of yours. It depends. You need to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the client when you subcontract, but you may also have to meet requirements of the principal contractor. So, that you meet the qualifications to do the work, you can show commitment to do it, if there are other requirements like security and so forth. But sometimes it's also more than that. So if you're working for a consultancy that has its own kind of corporate brand and its own values, you may need also to take on board their guidance and their practices as you're doing that work. And of course, subcontracting, just like a full contract, you are responsible for all your own tax, including GST and HST. So that's contracting. We're going to do the fastest survey of creating a business that you've ever had, because honestly, we could spend a day or more talking about this. But I'm going to try and give you the basics so that you can explore further. So first off, Why would anyone start a business? We're retired public servants, we've been salaried employees, we just maybe want to do a few things here or there. There's lots of good reasons to do it. It can help to build a better brand around what you're offering. There can be very hard tax and legal reasons why you have to register a business, including if you're seeking contracts or subcontracts. Often they want you to be a business. If you're going to hire employees, if you want to access certain programs and things, there's lots of reasons. Basically, the rule is that if you're going to be doing work through contracts and you're going to be earning 30,000 or more, register your business. The 30,000 applies to GST federally, but you'll see for provincial work as well. It's just a good practice. So the checklist to start a new business, this is really, I'm giving you the basics here. You have, first off, a few really important decisions when you register a business. And first is what kind of business? And by that, I don't mean what kind of sector or field of work, but rather what is the legal nature of the business? Will it be a sole proprietor? And that is what a lot of us end up doing, or at least we start with that. Or a corporation, you can also have a partnership business. Sole proprietor means it's just you. You're not creating a separate legal entity. You are the business. It's in your name. You sign the agreements, you earn the money, etc. And you are also the one liable if something goes wrong. A corporation is very different. It's a much more involved process. You are creating a separate legal entity, which is your corporation, that can enter into its own contracts. It can earn, it can pay you. It has a different tax rate, of course. Corporate tax is lower generally than income tax. And it also handles any liability whereby the corporation may get sued if something goes wrong rather than you. So very big decisions there. Check out that BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada website. They've got a fantastically easy breakdown between the different types. Another decision you need to make when you register is the name of your business. So your business is going to have a legal name. If it's sole proprietor, it's just your name, very straightforward. But you can have a different operating name. So for Samina, who's creating her business, the legal name of her business, if she's doing a sole proprietor, which again is what's most common, it's really easy. So her legal name, Samina Smith, that's it. But her operating name for the business may be, Maple Leaf Economics or whatever she wants it to be. To do this, the action item is you register with CRA, go on to the Canada Revenue Agency website where you register a business. It's actually really straightforward to do. You will be amazed, and you don't have to pay anything when you register a business with CRA. And this is going to give you a business number, capital B, capital N. You keep that, and that is your official identifier for your business, for the tax system, but also for other things. Um, Very often, you will also register provincially. You have to register with the province if you are using an operating name that is different from your legal name, but also for many other reasons. If you have a storefront kind of business, where you're operating a commercial space, if you're hiring people, if you need permits or licensing, there's a whole bunch of reasons to register with your province. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Often you do pay a fee for the provincial registration, but you also can access programs. You get onto the business registries, you're easier to find. So lots of good reasons there. Now, when creating a business online, so when you're doing those registrations, you don't have to submit a business plan. Neither the province nor the federal government is going to ask you for this for a simple sole proprietor business, but you should have one for yourself. In fact, even though it's further down the list, it's probably your starting point because you want to know why you are creating this business, what your main activity is, who your clients are, and so forth, like Samina was doing. You're going to want to think about how you promote and market your business. So that can be setting up a website, and laying out what you're going to offer and all of that. It can mean just networking by email or social media. So there's lots of different ways to market yourself. You're going to need a plan to manage your finances and your tax obligations. So again, your income tax, if it's a corporation, your corporate tax. And again, with a corporation, you have a lot more to do. There's a whole bunch of formal obligations. You need to have articles of incorporation. You need to have a board of directors. You need to report on activities, all of that. And you need to do the corporate tax, and you need to manage the GST, HST. And like we talked about for Samina and under contracts, you might also register as a supplier. You can do it federally, provincially, but do check out Canada Buys. And above all, always get advice. So, our last topic, and I know I'm whipping through these, but I hope we'll have some good questions. Our last topic is compensation, because all of these scenarios, this whole webinar series is about doing paid work in retirement. And so, the key question is, what is your time and talent worth? And the really unhelpful answer is that it varies quite a lot, and it's going to depend on a few things. So if you're being employed directly by the government, your time and talent will be measured by the classification and level of work you're doing. Same if you're working for another level of government, it'll go by the position. But a lot of times it's going to be by the nature of work, by the nature of what you're offering, and you need to look at some comparisons. So if you're offering um, management consulting services or audit services, you can look at what that type of work normally pays, do a search and do some comparison on that. Another important factor is market conditions, which is kind of a vague idea, but the idea of where you are, what will the market bear? What will those businesses or organizations afford to pay you? And it may vary quite a bit, because what you may get paid to do work with a private sector may differ from what you'll get paid with the government, and that may differ from what you'll get paid with not-for-profit or a smaller organization. So it does vary, and you may find that you have quite a range of rates. Um, do your research, of course. There's a lot of information online. You can use AI. I'm not the most advanced person when it comes to AI, but it is actually useful to research things like this. I was just doing this with a friend who was trying to figure out what to get paid as a speaking fee. And we used AI, and it actually was pretty accurate, which was great. But even more than that, ask questions. At any time with a client, with an employer, you can have an informal conversation most of the time, I find, and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out what the right range is. What do you normally pay? What's right for you? Don't shy from trying to have that conversation with them. And if you can't do it with the employer or client directly, talk to someone else talk to someone else who's doing this. Um, how you get paid generally will be hourly or daily rates. Sometimes it'll be a lump sum. Um, if you're doing casual, or term, it'll be a prorated salary. You may find that you need to submit an estimate for the work of how much time it's going to take to do it, and therefore what cost. Of course, if you're doing a contract bid through that formal procurement system, you're going to need to provide a total estimate of the total cost of the contract. But I find even sometimes for casuals, I will need to say, well, this is the project you want me to do. I think it'll take 8 weeks. And so then you can look at that. So just be prepared for that. You might have variable rates by the type of activity you're doing within a contract. So a good example is people who do training, where you might have one rate of pay for all your preparatory work and a different run for when you're in the classroom and delivering. So you may see that your contract needs different rates, and you need to set what those rates are. I've been quite lucky, because the people I've done that with have been forthcoming about what their normal rates are and what their range is, and I've really been able to use that to help figure out mine. You should consider your own costs, because anytime you're doing work in retirement, because you're not employed in an organization, you do have costs. It may be just, parking. If you have to go to a workplace and park, it may be upgrading your laptop or paying for software. If you're running a website, you may have costs. So there's a number of costs that you're going to need to consider just to make sure that the compensation is balancing out with that, or that at least it's covering enough of that. You're going to keep this in mind for your own income tax time where you may have deductions to make. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of information online on the CRA website on what sort of things can be business deductions, some direct, some indirect. The last thing I'm going to say about compensation is about managing and tracking your work time. So, tracking your time is easy, right? If you're working by the hour or day, you're going to mark that down on your spreadsheet to know how much you've worked and how much to submit to the client or to the employer. But managing your time, there's two really important things I want to say about that. First is that it may take a while to figure out what is a reasonable amount of time to do a certain task. And that's whether you're on a contract or a casual. It's, when you've come from working full time and we're all in busy jobs in the public service and you're used to doing like 20 things at once, you got a million things, you're going to fly through some of them, and the sense of urgency is always there. Just get it done and get it done quickly. When you're doing work in retirement, you're going to be a lot more focused on your task. And so it is an adjustment to figure out what is reasonable to do that task really well, to be thorough, to consult, and so forth. So don't expect you're just going to be whipping through, but you still want to give really good value to your client. The second thing about managing your time, and this is really important for us as retirees, is to be deliberate about your work time when you're retired. So, it can be really easy to fall into the trap when you're doing a contract or you have a casual of you get up in the morning, you get your coffee, you walk the dog, and then you plunk yourself down in front of your laptop and hours go by. You're doing some work, but maybe you're watching a video, maybe you're doing something else. And you realize after a while you've been sitting there for hours and you're not giving good value to yourself or to the client that way, and you're losing your day. So just be deliberate about planning when you're going to work and then stop and do something else for yourself. And the very last message is, even though we've just spent like an hour talking about working for money, it's not actually all about the money. When we work in retirement as retired public servants, generally this isn't a get rich quick scheme. We're working for a number of reasons, and it goes back to that very first reflection on thinking about the why, on what your goals are and what you want out of working. So yes, getting paid is great, but think about those other things you value. Maybe, a great experience or working with a certain organization that you really hold in esteem or people you want to work with. So, our very last notes are just to remember that you are the one in charge when you work in retirement. You have a choice if, how, and when you work, or if you don't, and you can change your mind. Manage your work like it's a business because you are self-employed and you don't have an HR team or a finance team. And so have that kind of bit of professional approach to manage your money and your work so you keep on top of it. Always make sure that you're well informed, get expert advice, get information, you know, call the pension center, call CRA, find out what you need to know, and use the services and support that are available because we pay for them with our taxes, and they're there to use. And always make sure you're taking time to take stock and to reflect on what you want, because ultimately, all of us want to enjoy this time as much as possible. So with that, a quick thank you to a number of people who have contributed to this webinar, because it's not just me. There's a lot of our friends and colleagues who have added their words of wisdom to this. You see them there. And I do want to give a special shout out to the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer at Treasury Board. That's OCRO. They have been incredibly supportive of this webinar for federal retirees, and they've contributed a lot of input. So we really appreciate it. There's a number of resources on this deck, forgetting my words. You can look at those after, go on to the website of the Ottawa branch and they'll be there. But let's now go to our Q&A. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tamara, for your excellent presentation. I'm aware that we are now at 12:30, and this is a 1-hour webinar, but we have a lot of questions lined up. So we will be able to continue and go to the question and answer. If you're unable to join us for the question and answer, thank you very much for your participation today. But we will delve into the question and answer session right now, and I will look through them. So as I mentioned, there's still time for you to vote for your favorite questions with the thumbs up feature. And if you want to put in questions that are not listed, take a look, see if all of the topics that you want to question are there, and add your own. So we'll take a little bit of time, I'll say probably about 15 minutes, and try and get through as many of these questions as we can. All right. So the first question I see here is, could you please provide the contact information to ask for previous federal security clearance reinstatement?
Okay, so we covered it's a great question. So for security clearance, we did cover that in the first webinar, so I will encourage you to go look at that. Um, Basically, the rule is that you cannot reinstate your clearance. So when you retire, your security clearance is deactivated. It's not canceled, it's deactivated. So it kind of goes to sleep. And then when you are being hired, if it's directly by the government, or it can be through a contractor that is qualified to do security cleared work, your clearance can be reactivated at that point in time. Generally, we encourage people before you retire to make sure you know the status of your clearance and you know how much time you have. If you are regularly using that clearance, it's really not an issue. It gets reactivated easily. The security section or PSPC will check and make sure it's there. Now, my understanding is that you can reach out to the Commissionaire's Service. So if you look online, commissionaires.ca, I think it is, you can inquire with them about your security clearance, but you cannot do anything for your clearance unless someone is hiring you. In the past, it was different. There used to be a way to do this through an organization that could update your clearance, but you can't do that anymore, unfortunately. But for most of us, you shouldn't worry. It just gets reactivated. If you need to renew it after a certain number of years, just be aware of that because that may add time to be hired.
Is there a central agency that provides a list of short-term, part-time, or casual jobs available with the government?
Unfortunately, there is not. This has been discussed a fair bit. If any of you are on the Facebook group for Government of Canada retired and soon to be retired, it's a great source of information. There's a lot of people on there. And this keeps coming up, and there really isn't. Jobs.ca, jobs.gc.ca, of course, is for full-time work usually. There is a list you can look up for government and council appointments, but that tends to be things like being on really senior positions or on boards and things like that. So it really does tend to be word of mouth. But there are kind of certain specialized ones. So if you come from the HR community, there actually is a registry for retired HR professionals that is done through Treasury Board, through OCRO, and the Human Resources Council. We talked about this in the last webinar. So you can go find the link, but there is an retired HR professionals portal, Government of Canada. Punch those words in. You can register, and that is great because you can actually be called up because often departments need short-term HR help. So there's a few things like that. If you come from a certain professional community, reach out to that community. But unfortunately, there is no centralized list, and you have to kind of work your contacts.
Great. We have a question here. Why is a casual not an employee under the legal sense, whereas term employments are?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer. It's part of the Public Service Employment Act, and I think you'd have to ask a labor specialist or an HR department about the why of it. But, basically, what a casual is by nature, it's expected to be emergency, short term, something that's really not part of a permanent need, but is filling a gap. Now, in reality, casuals are used in different ways, but it's just not meant to be part of that regular workforce in the way that a term, you're often filling a specific position that is part of the planned workforce. So it's meant to be a different kind of work. And I think that's why, but that's as good an answer as I can give on that one.
Yeah, I think you're right. A term is held against a position number, so there is like an allocation for that position in the public service. A casual is not. And I think a term comes with benefits and casual
Yes,
employment don't have
correct.
benefits.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. I've been told two very different things about casual contracts that are greater than 6 months. HR Civ said that one must work less than 12 hours per week on average. Otherwise, pension dues are automatically deducted, and pension payments may be suspended. However, the pension center tells me that if my contract reads as and when required, there are no restrictions on hours per week, and even the 90-day contract year limit does not apply. HR Civ does not agree with that. I don't know what HR Civ is. They don't agree with that, and where do we find a definitive authoritative guide?
Okay, so we did cover this a bit today, and it's in the Treasury Board. If you have to really, I find with the Treasury Board website, you really have to figure out which channel to go through. But the rule is this, and I can say this with confidence because I do talk to Treasury Board and to OCRO about this. So if you are full or part-time, and as I said in the thing, part-time is defined as being required to work 12 hours for more, and your letter of offer will say that you're part-time or you're full-time, then you do accumulate time towards that 6 months. The 6 months is counted by calendar. So I asked Treasury Board this specifically just the other week. So it's not, if you're working only 2 hours a day, it's not kind of a cumulative that adds up to 6 months. It's calendar. If you start working a casual on April 1st, by October 1st, you will be at 6 months if you are part-time or full-time. The as required, it has to say your casual has to say that you're as required or on demand, sometimes it's called, and it does not matter how many hours you work. I have done casuals that have had a lot of hours, but they're as required and it doesn't count. But again, I gave you that really big exception to that, which is that if you are not creating a gap between casuals, you're going to find yourself maybe in trouble. So even if it's an as required and you're working for months and months and you're accumulating hours, you're not at risk for the 6 months. Regardless of all of this, because those are what the rules are, always talk to the pension center. They really, really want you to do this because they don't want you to get in trouble with your pension. So if you're in doubt, call the pension center. Okay, I hope
Terrific.
did that cover all of that, Steve? I know there's a lot.
I, I, I think so. I mean, it's a complicated area.
Yeah.
Uh, does working overtime impact the 90-day count for casual?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, you know what? I don't actually know the answer. I'm afraid to admit that because it came up sometimes when I was doing casuals and that issue of how you submit your hours, because sometimes they want you to bundle hours. You are generally very much discouraged from claiming overtime work as a casual. But I have to admit, I don't have a good answer for you on that one because generally speaking, they don't want you to submit overtime hours. It complicates things in a casual. But I don't know if someone else has an answer they can source in the comments. Feel free.
Okay. Can you explain the cooling off period for newly retired federal employees where they start working for federal government again?
Um, Great question. And unfortunately, on that one, I'm sorry to have two questions in a row like this. We did ask Treasury Board to get back to us on this and have not got an answer yet. So you'll just have to hold on for that one. But as far as I'm aware, it's not usually a big issue. I know a lot of people who start doing casuals pretty quickly after, but we'll check that. And as soon as we get a response, we'll find a way to post that. So I'm sorry about that one.
Sure. Related to that, I was under the impression that you needed to be retired for at least 1 year to get a contract. Is that true or urban legend?
Um, so great question. I don't believe there is such a period because there wasn't in my case. I started doing a casual within the first year of retirement, and there was no issue with that. You do, sometimes you have to declare that. There's a place where you have to say that you are within a year of retirement. But as far as I know, that is not an obstacle. Someone else can correct me if that's wrong, but it hasn't been an issue.
All right. Is a sole proprietor required to register federally or provincially?
Ah, okay. So when you register a business, officially you can do either. You can register just with the province or you can register federally. Um, you're going to quickly get yourself into confusion if you don't start by registering federally, because if you, as a sole proprietor, if you start doing contracts and, if you're lucky enough that you're getting contracts that add up to 30,000 over a 12-month period, you must be registered federally. You must, because that's when your obligations for GST and HST kick in. So, um, you don't have to do anything if you're not going to be earning any money. If you're just going to do one, it's a $10,000 contract, and the client does not require you to be a registered business, because sometimes they do, then you don't have to do anything. You're fine if that's all you ever want to do. But if you want to have a business and you want to be doing contracts and you want to be doing kind of a variety of work, generally, the rule of thumb is register with CRA because you're going to have to do it at some point, and it can be a little more complicated if you register provincially first. And I won't go into it all, but it gets a little complicated because the tax systems for some provinces talk to each other with the federal government. Um, and so I found it's easier. Start with the federal, do the registration. The same day, you can register with the province, and you're going to get a business number federally, which you use again, you use that for your tax. You also use that if you're registering to be a supplier, like for procurement. Um, and then you can register provincially. You'll get a different kind of number provincially, which you use for provincial needs and programs. But generally speaking, you do both.
Terrific. We're getting down to the wire now. I see a couple of questions where people are asking if working for the provincial government or if doing volunteer work overseas or some other employment counts towards the 90 days or the 6 month rule. Just to be clear, this is only for employment with the federal government. And the impact on your pension is only applied when you're working for the federal government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you're working for another organization, you're volunteering, you're doing any of that, fantastic, go for it. And even if you're doing a contract with the federal government, so if you're, sign a contract to do training to your old department, but it's a contract, not a casual, not a term, you're fine. You have no impact on your pension. You don't have to worry about casual days. That those two things are really only if you're doing direct work where you're directly hired for as a casual or a term.
Okay. Terrific. We're down to the wire. There's one more that I'd like to get to, though, before we wrap up. How do you deal with CPP if you're a pensioner and already receiving CPP?
Um, Great question, and I wish I had a good answer for you. CPP does get deducted sometimes from your pay. I have that sometimes taken off my pay when I'm doing casuals, but I don't have an impact. Nothing changes with my pension, nothing gets affected. Just sometimes if you're working, you'll end up paying in a bit more. But we'll try to get a bit more information on that one and see if there's a way that we can post that because I'm afraid that's something that hasn't come up as much in my discussions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you can elect to draw your CPP at 60 and still be in the work market. So I would imagine that you would bring that to the attention of your compensation area and just advise them that you're already drawing CPP. All right. Okay. So thank you very much for your presentation. And we invite you to share your feedback on today's webinar. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Please take 2 minutes to complete the online evaluation form that you'll be offered before you exit Zoom. If you're not yet a member of the association, we hope that you consider joining us. Membership has its perks, including these great webinars, various discounts, and access to the Bel Air Direct travel insurance. And of course, that used to be Madoc. And of course, our association's main mission is to advocate for the protection of our members' federal pensions and benefits. A final reminder, we will be sending everyone a follow-up email with links to the recording of today's presentation and the presentation slides and other resources from Tamara, and of course, our website address too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, guys.